Welcome to Beat Diabetes. I'm Dennis Pollock, or as I like to think of myself, sitting in this chair sharing thoughts with you from different books. Uncle Dennis. Uncle Dennis is going to share with you today from the book, How Not to Get Sick. That sounds familiar to some of you because he wrote the first book, Why We Get Sick, and this is How Not to Get Sick, but it's about 60% recipes, so it's not just information, but he does have some good things to say in the early parts of the book, and I wanted to just share just a real brief video today about aging and its effect on insulin resistance. If you're a type 2 diabetic, your problem most likely is insulin resistance. And so he talks about how that is affected by age. Let me just share a quote from Dr. Benjamin Bikman. Dr. Ben Bikman is a biomedical researcher. He is a scientist, not a medical doctor, but he is fascinated with diabetes and insulin resistance, and almost everything he writes about or talks about has to do with that subject, so that definitely relates to all of us. One of the things he said in this book is that science has long known that the older we get, the more insulin resistance settles in. Kind of an unfortunate idea, insulin resistance settling in. But notice he says the older we get. That's why there just aren't that many diabetics that are 22, type 2s that is. There are some, and sadly that's increasing. Even teenagers are getting type 2 diabetes here these days because of our monstrous diet. But still, you're much more likely to contract it when you're older. And then one other thought he says, related to the aging process and type 2 diabetes. He says, one final and critical metabolic problem with getting old is sleep. The older we get, the worse we sleep. Well, amen to that. I have certainly found that out. When I was younger, I could drink 2 cups of coffee and go to bed for the night and sleep through the night. I can't do that. I can't even drink 1 cup of coffee normally. But boy, when I was young, I could sleep very well. Plus, I could sleep a lot later. These days, if I can sleep till 6:30 or maybe 7, I feel like I've achieved a major accomplishment. But in the old days, I could sleep till 8, 9, 10 sometimes. So the older we get, the worse we sleep. This is more than just having a lot on your mind. Yeah, a lot of times we assume, well, I didn't sleep well. I must have had a lot on my mind. That could be true. But in my case, it doesn't matter whether I've got a lot on my mind or a little on my mind or nothing on my mind, if that's possible. I just don't sleep as well. There are certain things I do now that help, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. But he says there are genuine changes in the brain and the production of sleep hormones. Sleep has a powerful metabolic influence. One bad night of sleep results in demonstrable insulin resistance the next day. One bad night of sleep, and you get insulin resistance more than normal the next day. And then he says, considering the years of bad nights that come with sleeping poorly with age, it's little surprise that age-related sleep changes contribute to a greater struggle with maintaining insulin resistance. There is a bigger struggle. So first, let's just talk about the whole age/insulin resistance relationship, and then we'll talk about sleep in particular. But it has its challenges, and one of those is insulin resistance becomes more of a factor. If you had it at all when you were younger, you're going to have it worse as you get older. If you didn't have it at all when you were younger, you may have it as you get older. And I certainly have found that out. But I can see traces of insulin resistance in my life practically going back to my teens. That's another story. But it does get worse. In a way, it's kind of like gaining weight. It is so much easier to gain weight when you're older. When I was younger, I could just eat and eat and eat, and it didn't matter whether it was high carb, low carb, or whatever. I was always slim. In fact, as a teen in early 20s, I worried that I didn't weigh enough. And especially when I was a teen and wanting to get a girlfriend or later get a wife, I thought, I'm so skinny, I've got to gain some weight. And I forced myself to gain weight by stuffing myself with all kinds of high-calorie foods. But in those early days, and even throughout my 20s, I could just eat so much and stay relatively slim, or at least average. And I can't do that now. If I ate the way I did then, I would weigh 250, 300 pounds today. So I've had to trim down. And that's true with insulin resistance as well. What this means is, if you're going to become more insulin resistant with age, normally, and there are ways to defeat that and work around it and still do well, but you're going to have to make some adjustments. I mean, there is a word that we all ought to be able to say it easily, quickly. It ought to come to mind throughout every day of our life, although it doesn't, but it should. The word is adaptation. You have to learn to adapt. People that can't adapt perish. And the perfect illustration of that I've used in some of my videos is the Sears Company. Sears Company was like the department store in the United States throughout the 20th century. But around the early 1990s or late 1980s, it got challenged by stores like Kmart and Walmart and Venture and Target. And Sears foolishly decided they would just keep right on doing what they had always done. They didn't modernize their stores. They didn't focus on electronics like Kmart and Walmart were doing. They looked old and stodgy because, well, they were old and stodgy. And as a result, they didn't adapt and they perished. Who among you has a Sears anywhere nearby your house? They've almost perished from the earth. There may be a few of them left, but there sure aren't many. And for all practical purposes, they just died because they couldn't adapt. They couldn't modernize. They could have had an internet store like Amazon. We might be shopping from Searsazon had they had enough foresight to make some changes and move into another direction. They couldn't do it. So what's the point? The point is, you've got to adapt. And as you get older, and when I say older, I don't mean you have to wait until your 80s to figure this out. As you start reaching middle age of about 45 or 50, you're going to have to adapt. And if you've got any tendency toward diabetes, toward metabolic syndrome, toward insulin resistance, you're going to have to adapt specifically to deal with that tendency. And so what I was talking about, you can't eat as much as you get older, is true with the carbohydrate issue, because carbohydrates drive high blood sugar and high insulin surges. And essentially that means they drive diabetes. Carbohydrates drive diabetes, especially the junk carbs. But you'll get to a point where any carb will be a problem for you. I mean, when you're 35 or 38 or 40, it may be you can just get rid of the junk carbs, the chips, the donuts, the sugary desserts of all kinds. And you can just move to more natural carbs, and you may still be able to eat quite a few carbs and get by. But there may come a time where even the natural carbs aren't going to work very well for you. So you're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to cut back on the carbs. And the older you get, the more you'll probably need to cut back. I know that's not a very encouraging word, but it's the absolute truth. Now, getting on to the other quote about the fact that as you get older, you don't sleep as well. You've got to make some adaptations about sleep. Number one, you need to go to sleep around the same time every night. That'll help some. Number two, you're going to have to do what I did, which is you just don't drink regular coffee after about 2 or 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Depends on how late you go to bed. I don't usually go to bed till 11:30 or so, sometimes 12:30, depending on if I have a beat diabetes video that I'm making. But you're going to have to go to bed around the same time. You're going to have to eat early enough to let all that digest at the same time, because if you've got a full stomach, it's going to be harder to sleep. And you're going to have to give up caffeine for, the late afternoon through the evening. There are changes you'll have to make. And, I'm okay with that. My attitude is this. I've lived a lot of years by now, and I've enjoyed lots of food, lots of activities, a lot of stuff in life. And as I get older, in order to kind of baby this body, such as it is, in order to kind of pamper it a little bit and cause it to last as long as possible, then I'm going to have to make some sacrifices, and I may not be able even to do the low carb thing the way I did the low carb thing 15 years ago. I mean, I've been doing low carb since around 2002. But my version of low carb today is stricter than it was in those early years, 2002 through 2005, 6. Much stricter. And it may need to get stricter still. But that's okay. I'm kind of coasting in at this point to my final end on this earth. And I want to live as long as possible, not because I'm so desperately in love with this life. As a Christian, I believe there's a better life ahead. But I can do good here in this life, and I can bless people here in this life. And Benedicta needs me. I've got kids that need me. So I want to kind of coast in and pamper my body a little bit. And that means, there's that word again, adaptation. I've got to adapt. So know this, that you're going to have to make those changes. Your body doesn't work as well. You don't see as well. You don't hear as well. You have all kinds of issues in your later years that you didn't have in your earlier years. And insulin resistance is one of them. The good news is, by making the changes, making the sacrifices, doing the adaptation, you can still do well. I was talking to my eye doctor the other day, and he asked me, do you have diabetes? I mentioned I had a diabetes channel, so he's like, oh, do you have diabetes? I said, well, no, but I sure would have if I ate the way everybody else did. And I went on to tell him, I've probably got a better A1C than a lot of guys in their 30s. And he asked me, what is your A1C? I said, well, it's around 4.9. So, I'm doing pretty good for an old guy. And you can too, for an old guy or an old gal. But you'll have to make the changes. You can do it. You need to do it. And by the grace of God, you will do it.
If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our uploads page is in the description.